Poetry is the language of the heart. And if I had my way, I would just read poetry to you this morning, preferably in bed. Poetry in bed. Have you tried it? That's the best. However, I will talk for a moment, and then if there's time, I'll read you a couple of poems. Because my interest is in how it is that all of the world's wisdom traditions remain alive and relevant through the centuries, and why they're worth preserving the jewels of. What I mean is that, as you've probably noticed, all the world's great wisdom traditions have these radiant jewels of mystical awakening and social justice. And so, although I personally grew up in an anti-religious family, a so-called secular Jewish family, where religion was suspect, I couldn't resist the impulse to connect with every single religion I ever encountered. There was this irresistible draw to, and the more ancient the religion, the better. And the more vestments and costumes that went along with the religion, the more deeply attracted, passionately attracted, and inexplicably so I seemed to be. So after years of trying to resist that, I finally surrendered and realized that the reason I was drawn to all of the world's religious and spiritual traditions is because they all were beautiful, and that this is a place where monogamy makes no sense in that love affair. Although it is still monogamous in the sense that I was falling in love with the same beloved in all of these different disguises. So I am a bee, I've realized, and my task is to delight in the garden of the human spirit and to collect the nectar from the most beautiful and fragrant flowers in that garden and make honey. And with that honey, I nourish myself and I hope to feed the hungry world. I say no to the noxious weeds that spring up in that garden. I do not drink the poison. You are a bee too. One of the fruits of the counterculture in which I grew up was the emphasis on the validity of all paths and wisdom ways. Well, there may have been a teensy bias against right-wing Christianity. But other than that, there was this openness to all paths to truth. By the time I was 13, I had been exposed to many essential teachings, practices, and scriptures of Hinduism, Zen and Tibetan Buddhism, Vipassana, Sufism, indigenous wisdom traditions, shamanic rituals, mystical Judaism. And they were all presented as being of equal value, so it seemed absolutely natural to say yes to them all. So I guess I should tell you why this happened to me. I grew up in a counterculture family in the 60s and 70s, and my parents uprooted us from our mainstream suburban lifestyle in Long Island, New York, and we went on a year-long odyssey around North America, spent a lot of time in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, and ended up in Taos, New Mexico, which was a real crossroads at the time for all of these different spiritual traditions, and still is, and actually always has been. And so by growing up in this countercultural environment, I was naturally exposed to many different religions and spiritual paths. And the school that I went to was run by the Lama Foundation, where Ram Dass wrote "Be Here Now," for those of you who are familiar with that. And so that was the context of my youth and childhood, so that I thought everybody was like that. I thought everybody was in love with the best of all the world's spiritual traditions, and that in order to have a profound encounter with each one, it wasn't necessary to buy into the whole belief system with all the baggage that came with it. So it's important that you realize that this was my formation. This isn't a rebellious stance that I'm taking where I am saying yes to all the spiritual traditions of the world, that I am living as an interspiritual being, because it came naturally to me. So it was only as I grew older that I was told repeatedly, actually, that I would eventually have to pick one and go deep. And this going deep business really bothered me for many years. It was as if my heart response to each of these faith traditions was somehow superficial, that I was dabbling, that I was being a dilettante, when in fact my subjective experience was that every one of these encounters with the sacred in these different religious and spiritual contexts was a profound one and an intimate one and a life-changing encounter. Rather than being shallow and inadequate, it was passionate and profound, and something was happening that was changing me every time that I had one of these encounters. So it took me years to recognize that this message of picking one and going deep was somehow abusive. Have you been subjected to that, any of you? Like there's something wrong with you, and if you have this impulse to say yes to them all. So it was years before I was able to stand up in that and say, yes, I am having profound and transformational encounters in each of these many holy houses. To pick one, in fact, felt like a violation of my covenant with my beloved, with this inner intimacy that I had found. And I wasn't willing to lock my God in a box. So, not only do I think it's okay to explore and embrace many different spiritual paths, I think it's our birthright. And not only do I think it's our birthright, but I think it's imperative now. And not only do I think it's our highest calling to say yes to the sacred in all of its many holy houses, but I think it's the evolutionary trajectory. You may have noticed this too. Traditional religious boundaries are melting. Pretty soon the locks will slide right off the doors. The doors themselves will disappear. I'm not worried about losing rigor. That's one of the accusations of the interspiritual practitioners. By opening my heart to all of these different wisdom ways and all of these different ways of praising the formless, we lose nothing, as Swami so beautifully showed us. I believe in our capacity to cultivate discipline and show up for the hard work of the spiritual life and not stop with the feel-good favors. So that's one of the things people ask us about. How do you navigate this spiritual path without just dabbling and being a dilettante and just picking the parts that make you feel good, and then as soon as it gets challenging, you move on? So my response to that is I think we are endowed with a faculty of discernment, all of us. I believe in our ability to discern the truth, the life-giving truths from the artifacts of power and control that shut down our hearts and separate us from each other. This impulse to otherize is very subtle and insidious, and even those of us who think of ourselves as the most open-minded and open-hearted tend to fall into that impulse to make other and to separate with, say, fundamentalists. We're all very open-minded and we see the oneness of everything, but those fundamentalists don't see the truth. So how do we continually disarm our hearts? To me, that's the highest task of the interspiritual quest, is to disarm the heart and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to be transformed by our encounter with the sacred everywhere, not only in the established world's wisdom traditions, but in a sunset and in a death and in a birth and in sex and in the most ordinary, often unpleasant manifestations of life in the human condition. So how do we say yes to the sacred everywhere, at all times, in all forms, knowing that what we're saying yes to is the love that transcends all form? So I think of Jacob wrestling all night with the angel of God, and being blessed with the spiritual name of Israel. When dawn broke and Jacob was triumphant. So Israel, she who struggles with the infinite. So whether or not we come from a monotheistic culture or heritage or not, or a non-theistic context, I feel that there is something of Jacob in all of us, and that we are wrestling with those angels. And that's the discernment process. And so as bees, I'm hopelessly mixing my metaphors, and it's called poetic license. To go back to the metaphor of the bees, a bee knows exactly which flowers to draw the nectar from, and knows what the poison is, and does not draw from the poison. It's just good sense. And I'm grateful that we have that good sense and we know just what to do. So we're designed, I believe, to grapple with the divine and to galvanize our faith in the process. So the interspiritual path is not for sissies. It's a rigorous, fierce path to continually make ourselves naked when it would be so much more comfortable to wrap up in some established belief system that says, we found it and they're still in illusion. And the reason we disarm our hearts again and again and again is because the beloved wants us naked so that we can have a direct encounter with the source of love. So, wherever we can find it, by the way, wherever we can find it. And this is the true jihad. The jihad is the struggle, the striving to shake truth out of all of the other stuff that is not true. And the discerning feature of truth seems to be if it opens our hearts and makes us love more. My background is as a translator. You may know of the Spanish mystics, San Juan de la Cruz, St. John of the Cross, and Santa Teresa de Avila. And Teresa says that when she was being investigated by the Inquisition for all of her fancy visions and voices and raptures and ecstasies, she said, you don't have to bother, guys, actually investigating me here, because I continuously subject myself to my own rigorous inquiry, process of inquiry. And it goes like this. I just ask God. She had a very intimate relationship with the Holy One. Beloved, is this vision of you an artifact of mental illness? Am I just nuts? Is it a trick of the devil? Or is this truly a gift from you? And the answer she received was, if it enlarges my heart and makes me love more, it's true. And turned out the inquisitors couldn't resist that logical proof that she used. And so the ultimate fruit of this interspiritual dance is to feed the hungry world, to offer the gifts of this dance that we do with the Holy One wherever we can find her, to any and all beings who suffer, and to our Mother, the Earth. Do I have time to read a poem? Where's my time person? Okay, thank you. This is from my namesake, Mirabai. Oh, my friends, what can you tell me of love, whose pathways are filled with strangeness? When you offer the Great One your love, at the first step your body is crushed. Next, be ready to offer your head as his seat. Be ready to orbit his lamp like a moth giving in to the light, to live in the deer as she runs toward the hunter's call, in the partridge that swallows hot coals for love of the moon, in the fish that, kept from the sea, happily dies, like a bee trapped for life in the closing of the sweet flower. Mira has offered herself to her Lord. She says, the single lotus will swallow you whole. How much time? Is that it? Can you show me how much? 15. I can read you some poems. So my relationship with ultimate reality is both non-dual and devotional. And Rick and I were speaking last night about the fact that these are not contradictory paths. So just as I was given the message at a young age that I had to pick a particular spiritual tradition and go deep in order for it to be real and valid, and I knew in my heart that wasn't true, and it's only as I've grown older that I've finally come to grips with the fact that not only is it not true that we have to pick one in order to have a profound and deep spiritual life, but that what I've been experiencing all along is truly a deep, intimate encounter. Similarly, I no longer see the non-dual spiritual path as being superior to the bhakti path, the path of devotion. In fact, they're completely intertwined for me. And so when I sit in meditation, I drop down into, every once in a while, that deep, empty place that is plenitude, that is so delicious, where all distinctions dissolve, including any sense of a separate self. And then I emerge back into duality and celebrate that, because in duality I experience the lover-beloved dance that is so much in my bones. And so for me it's poetry that speaks that language of the heart, and not only describes the Holy One, but evokes that sense of the sacred and that intimacy of love. So I'll just read you a couple of things. I translated this poem, and it may just be that this poem is all I get. We'll see. By John of the Cross, in a little book I did for Sounds True, just called St. John of the Cross. I entered into unknowing and remained there, knowing nothing. This place transcends all thought. I had no idea where I was, but when I found myself there, without knowing where there was, this sounds like something Swami Byandananda would have written, I suddenly understood sublime things, ineffable things. I will not even try to say what I felt as I let myself down into the arms of unknowing. This embrace transcends all thought. I discovered the science of perfect peace, perfect holiness, a direct path opened through the heart of solitude. Speechless, I walked into the unknown. This journey transcends all thought. I was so intoxicated, so utterly absorbed, so completely enraptured. All my senses were drained of sensation, and my spirit was filled with an understanding beyond understanding. This awareness transcends all thought. Whoever arrives at the land of unknowing frees herself of herself. Everything she thought she knew falls away, and her consciousness expands to enfold the whole universe. This circle transcends all thought. The higher she ascends, the less she understands. The dark cloud that lights up the night reveals itself as pure mystery. The knower rests in unknowing. This dark light transcends all thought. Such knowing by unknowing is so exalted, so potent, that there is not a thinker alive who can grasp it with his mind. Who can reach that high? We can only understand by not understanding. This wisdom transcends all thought. It is a science so exalted, a study so sublime, that no human faculty can contain it. The only way to attain it is to plunge into the unknown. This leap transcends all thought. Listen, this sacred understanding lies in a single sip of the divine essence. Knowing by unknowing is an act of mercy the Beloved pours on us. This mercy transcends all thought. And so John of the Cross was a non-dual bhakti yogi 500 years ago in Spain. What's my time?
7 minutes.
Okay, thanks. I got completely mixed up on the time, but that comes from hanging out with poetry. Have you noticed? Time is an elusive creature. So I would love to open it up. Can we do that for questions and reflections? Forgot to ask if that's all right in this context. Who's in charge here? Oh, I am. Yes. Hi.
Hi, Mirabai.
Hi.
Last night in some of the talk with Rick and also at the dinner table, I noticed that you said several times some things about service in the world, about social action, things like that. I wondered if you could just speak just briefly, a little bit, just a little taste of your sense of the implications of interspirituality on social action, and how do we engage in the world out of this inspiration?
Thank you so much for that question, Francis. Let's see. So many things, and we have such a short time. For me, it's always been obvious that the fruits of this encounter with the sacred in all of these different contexts, spiritual contexts, or what I call holy houses, is meant to feed the world. I think from growing up in a family of socially conscious and active people, I was raised with a sense of the interconnected web of being, and that all of us belong to each other, and that any kind of private spiritual exercise was a waste of time and kind of an affront to the reality of suffering in the world. And so that is, just as my natural inclination is to be drawn to and draw from all of these different wisdom streams, it also has always made sense to me that action and contemplation are completely and inextricably entwined. I've never understood the separation. And right now there is this movement toward activating contemplatives and quieting down the activists. And I think that most of us have always kind of seamlessly understood and lived that sense of if we are all interconnected, which is what I find from walking an interspiritual path, then that means we're all interconnected, and the suffering of one is the suffering of all. Okay, that's probably enough for now. Thank you for your question. Beautiful. There's, yeah, maybe you can pick people, Raphael, because I can't really see.
If you live in a self-organizing universe, why do you have to service it?
Start that again, please.
If we live in a self-organizing universe,
Yes.
why do we always have to serve it and remodel it and do all that other stuff we're doing? Can't we just leave things alone? I mean, we've been meddling around for 10,000 years and these things are getting worse, right?
They talk about that in this book, the Tao Te Ching. Don't mess with the universe. It's just right the way it is. And what we could do best is to just look to nature for how things ought to be, and we'll know exactly what to do instead of imposing our own agenda on it, including our social justice agenda or our environmental responsibility agenda. So yes, that too. Okay, so my response to that is, and I think Lao Tzu would agree with me, is that if we are to engage effectively in the world and make an effort to alleviate some suffering where we can, it's incumbent upon us to do that without an agenda, without a strong opinion on the matter. And from John of the Cross to Lao Tzu to the Buddha to, I think, all of the great wisdom teachers and the feminine mystics really seem to get this. No offense. That feminine just means feminine, not female necessarily, is that our task is to approach the existence of suffering with love, not with an analytical, let me fix this broken thing agenda, but to be with what is. And that is a great service. When we can quiet down at the clamor of our opinions and be present to and listen to and pay attention to what actually is, not a lot of meddling is needed, where we impose our own ideas on things and mess them up. By listening with love, that's often all we need to do to know how to help. So thanks for your question. I don't know if I addressed it, but are we out of time? Okay, one more. There's
yes,
oh, there you go. Hi.
I resonate very much with both the non-dual and the bhakti and being a bee. Just a small, it's probably an alternate thing that I needed to get over my intellectual barrier first through one path or mechanism, i.e. that I read Ramakrishna and Vivekananda for a large number of years, and that getting over the intellectual barrier in some sense opened me up to the surrender. And when there was love coming from a real emotional connection between one, the one tradition, the Ramakrishna's tradition, then I found that the love connection between all of the other traditions, the Jesus, I'm not talking of books now anymore. It is direct connection with Jesus or, Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King or the Sufi saints or Krishna or Chaitanya. So that, then it automatically comes to you. It feels like that. So that's the only reason I thought that a single path to get over your own struggle, jihad, if you will, the intellectual barrier.
Thank you.
Comment?
Thank you. Okay, are we there? Okay, thank you so much, everyone.